Okay, welcome everybody to season 3 of our PlayMakers Masterclasses. I'm Al Lockhart-Morley, I'm Box of Tricks Literary Associate, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this session, Endings, Finishing That Play with Patrick Hughes. Patrick's a Liverpool-born playwright and dramaturg who took part in our Playbox writer on attachment program back in 2017, I think it was, where he wrote a play with us, and has since gone on to another PlayMakers project with Oxford Playhouse. There's obviously a lot of playmakers out there, and we're absolutely thrilled to have him back in the family for one night only to deliver this workshop. Just a bit of Zoom etiquette. If you have any questions, Patrick will sort of let you know how he wants to facilitate that in terms of questions within the workshop, but feel free to just put anything for me in the chat or for Patrick, and I'll sort of just be lurking in the chat, keeping an eye on things if needed. So without further ado, Patrick, I shall hand over to you.
Hello guys, how are you doing? Good to see so many faces. Yeah, so what I'll do with this session is, you don't need to like put your hands up or anything like that. Just kind of shout out, stop me whenever, ask any questions during. If you would prefer to, you can use the chat, but just do kind of what you prefer. There's no kind of hard and fast etiquette when it comes to this. So just chime in whenever you want. So I'm gonna talk. I did this talk to the Everyman about 6 months ago, and it's been a kind of joy to revisit that and kind of look at that. And it's interesting because every time I do this, it's less of a masterclass, I think, as a kind of because I feel like I get a lot from just speaking to you guys and just kind of delivering this, and as a writer, kind of processing what I'm saying in my head about endings. So yeah, it's definitely a symbiotic thing. So I'd just like to quickly go round, if you want to as well, and if you don't want to speak, just pop it in the chat. And if you can have a think of your favourite writer currently, and that can be any medium, and a film or a play or a TV show that you think's got a good ending. You don't have to explain why. This is just a kind of conversation start to get us going. So I'm going to go around and say hello to... okay, Bethan, you're nearest to me, unfortunately for you. So, hello.
Hi. So, favorite writer, that's difficult. Probably Harold Pinter, both to read and watch. And a film with a good ending. I'd probably say Seven Psychopaths by Martin McDonagh, because there's kind of a meta moment, I guess, where the film role kind of burns up and then we have this like reminder from a previous character, and it's just a very kind of, yeah, quite a twisted ending, but
it's a great segue, because there will be mention of the beauty queen of Lenan.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, seamlessly, Bethan, you've kind of got involved in this already. So Naomi, hello.
Hi.
Who's your favorite writer at the minute, and what film, TV show or play has a great ending?
My favorite writer at the minute? Oh, heck. Okay, today my favorite writer, and it's just today, is Arthur Miller, because I just read The Price, and I just found it really gripping and dynamic, the dialogue and how it's sustained. And then a film with a good ending. I really like the final shot of the boy in striped pajamas, where it just does that really long pull away from the gas chamber door, and it just looks, I don't know.
That's great.
Beautiful but awful.
Yeah. It's that kind of lasting impression that kind of you go away kind of remembering for better or for worse. Hello, Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Who's kind of a writer that you like at the minute?
My favourite writer is kind of an obscure American kind of grit lit Southern American writer called Frank Bill.
That's great. This is good about these sessions as well, is that we can all kind of scribble these things down and go searching afterwards. So that's good. And what's a good ending that you've seen or you've?
The one that comes to mind is the movie The Father that was in the cinema maybe a few months ago.
Is it Olivia Colman, was it?
Yeah, really good. Well, really good everything, but yeah, particularly like the ending.
Amazing, thank you. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, I'm so tired. My mind is like really blank.
You don't have to. Just it's nice to meet you if you just want to say hello.
Yeah, hi. I guess I like Gone Girl, that ending, and the whole plot is quite twisty. You don't really know where it's going to go, so quite like that. Favourite writer at the moment, I don't know really with plays. I'm kind of reading quite a bit and keep changing my mind from the stuff that I used to like. Like I picked up Jerusalem just before I was reading it, and I really loved it when I first, and I'm actually going to see it in the summer. But when I was reading the opener, I think, God, it's so sexist, isn't it, in places?
It's interesting how work can kind of, how life can kind of refocus the way you look at plays, and it's really interesting. All right, amazing, thank you. Hello, Ginny.
Hello, hi. Hello. So my favourite book writer at the moment is Maggie Nelson, who's written a book called The Argonauts, which is boss. My favourite playwright at the moment is Claire Barron. She did Dance Nation, but they actually use loads of different font sizes to add to the emotion of the page. I don't know whether she had an input into that, but I just really loved it as an idea. I thought it was brilliant. And my favourite ending, I'm going to go with a film, which is Lost in Translation, when they have that little whisper, and I love it. Thanks.
Amazing. Caitlin, hello.
Hiya, you're right. My name's Caitlin. Do I need to say that? I can't remember.
That's fine, don't worry.
And my favourite writer, I'm going to butcher his name, is at the minute is Stefan Goloszewski, who wrote Him and Her and Mum. Just obsessed. I mean, I'm really sorry if I butchered his last name.
No, that's good.
If he's in here tonight, I'm sorry, Stefan, but love your work. And a film ending, the first one that came to mind was Another Year by Mike Leigh.
Amazing.
Last shot of Leslie Manville, just so heartbreaking.
Thanks so much. We've got Terry's just said hello in the chat. Rosalie McDonough, and the best ending is A Doll's House, which is great. Oh, we've got Jolene and Pete, that's fine. Best ending, 12 Angry Men. And 12 Angry Men's good because it's kind of like a play and a film, which is really interesting. Anyone else, if you want to type in the chat? If not, oh, hello, Teresa. Hello. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm late getting back from work and I've got a filthy nurse's costume on.
Oh, don't worry.
Uniform, not a costume. I don't dress up as one for fun. And I'm just trying to hide under a cardigan. That's why I didn't have my camera on.
Don't worry.
Writers at the moment, I'm obsessed with Wes Anderson and just seen, I keep calling it The French Connection, but it's not. It's
I was about to say that as well. You mean The French Connection?
The French Connection, which is also a brilliant script. Yeah, brilliant film, anything by him. And the ending, the best ending of any film ever is, it's an Alan Parker film called Birdie from the sort of late 80s, early 90s. And nobody's ever heard of it, but it's Nicolas Cage and Matthew Modine, and it's sort of they're ex-Vietnam, and Matthew Modine's repeatedly trying to kill himself, and he thinks he's become a bird. And he just runs and jumps off the top of this building, and you think he's flying away, and he's not. He's jumped down about 6 foot, and then everyone runs to the edge, and he just goes, "What?" Yeah, it's a brilliant, and I just watched the ending. It's brilliant.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant film. Yes, so that's
amazing. Thank you so much, and feel free to turn your camera off.
Yeah, sorry.
Don't worry about that at all. No.
I'm here now.
Whatever you want to do is fine. And hello to everyone else. If you want to say hello, just pop up. And at any point towards this, you can just butt in and say hello. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to briefly talk about quickly that why my medium, why the thing I like is, there's a quote about theatre that I really enjoy, and it's Willem Dafoe who said the great theatre is about challenging how we think and encouraging us to fantasize about a world we aspire to. And I think that that's something that has always kind of stuck by me with theatre, aspiring to a kind of world we want to create. And so that kind of ending doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. It means the end of the kind of story or the moment that we're going to show. And that's what we're going to kind of go into a little bit during this talk. The quote that was on the tweet that Box of Tricks did was from the Beatles, and it was, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And not just because I'm like shoehorning in Scouse musicians into everything I do. It's more just that it's a kind of the idea of balance, which I think is really important to an ending. It's that kind of give and take, which is really vital as a writer when you're thinking about your work. It's about plot and character, each kind of working together, taking from each other and giving back to each other in the same way. So for me, endings is how we contextualize life. People ask at the end of people's life, how old were they when they died? How did they die? If you think about obituaries, I think of them as kind of published endings of non-fiction. And it kind of, with an obituary, you kind of have to summarize the essence of someone in a very kind of short, pithy, succinct way. And in a way, it's kind of like a micro play. So if you think of Prince, their obituary as Prince, who has died at age 57, was to pop music of the 1980s what David Bowie had been to that of the previous decade. It's sole authentic genius. So these words have kind of been chosen and crafted at the end of his life to kind of summarize everything about him. I think that's a kind of interesting way to kind of think about writing a kind of obituary of your play, or thinking about how you can succinctly sum things up at the end. So talking about an ending foreshadows and impacts the meat of the story. You can start at the beginning, but often the beginning is kind of the easiest bit to write, because you don't have those commitments that you do at the end that you have to kind of tie up those loose ends. I guess they're important because, like, with an insight and incident, the writer chooses what open up the world of the play and where to start. The ending does the kind of opposite of that. And it's about when you pull the curtain down. The ending doesn't mean it's the end of the story necessarily. It's about the end of this story you want to tell. It's deliberately chosen by you to kind of say, this is where the curtain falls, or this is where the credits roll. So it's quite an interesting power that you have as a writer. So what do people think generally make a good ending in any medium? Feel free to shout out. Or type in the chat. Yeah, a twist in the end. And then that can link into satisfying. Caitlin said bittersweet.
I've got one where you kind of leave it thinking about all the things you've seen and reassessing what you've seen. So it's
like
reflective. Yeah.
That's, yeah. And because that takes you, what's interesting about that ending is that that's not the end in a way, because you've taken it outside of the parameters of the theatre or of the film, and you've given it its own kind of life in your head, which is kind of that. I'm not really going to go into this kind of philosophical thing about is that going to really be the end of that, but it's interesting because it's kind of affected you and changed. And the same with something unexpected, something controversial is good, because if you think about, especially theatre, it's something that you talk about afterwards straight away. Even if you don't necessarily want to, people will be asking you what you thought of him, what your feelings were. So I guess there's a life after the ending. But my kind of hot takes on this of what makes a good ending is tying up loose ends. That's a kind of like, if you don't always have to, but tying up loose ends, there will be loose ends that you will tie up. Something that kind of embodies the theme of the work. Maybe one final obstacle that will be overcome in the future, but the characters have the tools now to overcome that. Resolution, basic but important. And by resolution, it doesn't have to be like a fairy tale ending. It's just the kind of the main character is developed and has kind of changed from point A to point B. And then always ask the question, why is this story ending here? Why is it important for this to be the point where you end it? You can either do that earlier or later. There are a lot of things that that will deliberately end or like cut to black for effect, or there'll be things that we'll look at later that drag it out, and that can be actually quite interesting as well. So I've been doing for this a lot of reading of Stephen Jeffries, who does a really amazing book on playwriting. And this section is just kind of me redigesting what he says, but I think it's really important, very valid when we're thinking of endings. So he kind of lays out a kind of a selection of things that he say are the kind of endings that convey a lot of work. So the first one's that kind of basic one, which is good, triumphant in the end. So if you think about that, it's like the Cinderella ending. Whatever happens in this story, in this world, good will prevail. Often it's anti-realist. It's kind of this kind of sugar-coated implausibility, the Disneyfication, I guess. And there's a kind of passiveness to the hero in this, because we know the hero is going to save the day. Is there an example of theatre you can think that follows this form? And it's very predominant around this time. Yes, it's panto. So that's exactly that. The characters are kind of like pawns in the kind of the way the story's not always that important. It's kind of like the joy of the event. You know what's going to happen. I knew that was coming. So that's your kind of one. I don't know if you will necessarily use that, but it's a kind of important one. It's the basis of all kind of fairy tales. Number two is a kind of broader heading, which is the hero who keeps going. So if you think about this, this is a hero who has an unflinching desire to overcome or save the day or win. And there's kind of 4 sections to this that Stephen Jeffries puts out, which is really interesting. And number 1 is the hero triumphs, vindicating the values of society. So what we mean by this is the hero wins, and the hero proves that the world that they're in is just and fair, just like the world thinks it is. So for an example, something like, I don't know, Harry Potter, which is everyone wants this character to succeed in the world, and it's good versus evil, and then that person does succeed, and it's justifying the good that the whole world is for. So it's kind of like good character in a good world comes against evil and wins. Then the second one of that would be the converse, which is the anti-hero fails, vindicating the views of society. So that would be kind of bad person in the good world loses. A kind of broad idea of this would be Macbeth. So Macbeth's in a kind of world, it's just a kind of normal world that we explore, and we kind of assume that people want good to triumph. And Macbeth goes against that as the anti-hero and fails. So that's the anti-hero failing, vindicating the views of society. Often with that, there's a moral involved. Then there's the hero fails, undermining the values of society. These are kind of probably my favorite types, which are kind of realist dramas. If you think of something like If Beale Street Could Talk, the novel and the film, it's often about like injustice in a world where injustice is prevalent. And often in realism, kind of like I, Daniel Blake as well, you see that character struggle, and ultimately they do not achieve what they want. They can achieve things, but ultimately the power of that world is too much. And then these are all good examples as well. And the final one is the anti-hero triumphs, asserting their views against society, which is interesting that someone mentioned this. Jerusalem's one of them, because the anti-hero in that is Rooster, and there's a kind of help from the gods, and they kind of go away relatively unpunished and unscathed in this way. So there's kind of 4 sections, and it's quite useful to kind of think of films or plays that kind of work in those parameters, and then you'll kind of get a clearer sense of what they are. The final one that he said was the debt. that must be paid. And if there's a kind of major example of this in literature and in theatre, with Faustus. So this ending is kind of something that you know as an audience is coming. There's this debt that looms over the play. Faustus being the play about, or the novel about, someone who kind of sells their soul, and you know that these actions are going to come up to, and you know that at the end there's going to be payment. If you think interestingly, there's certain plays or films where the audience don't know about this debt that needs to be paid, which, if you think of Top Girls by Carol Churchill, there's a kind of, the debt is there, but you only find out at the end that it needs to be paid. So a character's done something in exchange for something. But often this can kind of have a big showdown at the end, when you realize that that is the crux of it. So I'm going to show you your first clip, and this is going to be more of this is kind of a traditional ending. This is kind of old school, and tell me kind of what is happening at the end, not necessarily in the plot, but what we're getting from this ending. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, let me share this screen. Share screen. Here we go. Have you got audio there as well? Thank you.
I haven't got audio, Pad.
Hmm?
I haven't got audio. I don't think there is audio.
No, I've not got audio either.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I can do this in 1 second. Here we go.
Round up the usual suspects. Well, Rick, you're not only a sentimentalist, but you've become a patriot.
Maybe, but it seemed like a good time to start.
I think perhaps you're right. Might be a good idea for you to disappear from Casablanca for a while. There's a free French garrison over at Brazzaville. I could be induced to arrange a passage.
My letter of transit? I could use a trip. If it doesn't make any difference about our bet, you still owe me 10,000 francs.
And that 10,000 francs should pay our expenses.
Our expenses? Mm-hmm. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
All right, great. So, even if you haven't seen that film, what are you getting from that ending? What kind of ending is it?
You get resolution.
Exactly, yeah. It's very like straightforward resolution, kind of the end. Well, if you could think about any of those, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is interesting as well. With the resolution, you get plot resolution, but it's open-ended as well. So if you think about the Stephen Jeffries, he's the anti-hero, and he's struggling against the society he's in. So I guess it's kind of like Rooster. Yeah, the ongoing story is really interesting. It's like Beckett's play Endgame. It starts with the line, "Finished, it's finished." This film ends with the start of a new friendship. You can tell that there's something going to happen with these characters afterwards. even if we don't see it. It's like, I guess, with, but whatever you choose to do with an ending, whichever one of these endings you choose, I'd just kind of stick to what feels right with your story, and don't feel like you have to change because of advice or things that anyone say. If you've got an idea of your play or your film or anything like that, and you've got an ending that you think suits it, stick with it. Often people will rewrite their work based on notes and ideas of what they think should happen at the end. And this is kind of parodied in this video that I'm going to show you now, which links in with this. This is the advice I'm going to give you, not to let anyone rewrite your ending. Okay. Yeah.
Here comes two.
Louis, I think this could be the start of a beautiful friendship.
Look out, Rick. He's packing heat.
Good work, Sam. Come on, I'll buy you a falafel.
Not so fast, Schmattenheimer.
Hope you don't mind my dropping in.
Not at all, sweet cakes. You know what to do, Sam.
Unbelievable. I'll say. Wasn't it?
And I guess you're parodying that idea of the open-endedness of what the film actually is, having that at the end, question mark. So yeah, don't let people rewrite your ending. There's another ending that I'm going to show you and think about how this relates to what we've been talking about, and think about these characters and think about this ending. What do you get from this? By the way, there are going to be a lot of spoilers in this because we are talking about endings. But have a little look at this and see what you think. You should all be familiar with this anyway.
And place your hands in plain view.
What are you doing?
I'm not giving up.
Max, you gotta do something. How many times, Max? How many times did we gonna be fucked over? Hey, listen. Will you pull yourself together now and listen to me? You calm down. Don't make me sorry I brought you.
Damn it! I repeat, cut your engine off and place your hands in plain view.
Okay, then listen. Let's not get caught. What are you talking about? Let's keep going. What do you mean? Go. You sure? Yeah. Get it.
Hey!
Okay, so what have we? So that's Thelma and Louise, obviously, and what are we getting from that ending? I know, right? I can't watch that without welling up. What kind of ending is that?
I forgot what the ending actually is.
So they definitive, yeah. So they the two of them decide that they can't go on running away from the law and everything else, and then they drive off together. Tragic, yeah. But But as our good friend Nick Cave says, death is not the end. And even though these characters can't exist in the world of this play and can't carry out their objections, I guess there's resolution for the characters. They've both decided that they're going to be together, and they will impact others who still exist in that world. So I guess it is definitive, but yes, it's triumphant and empowering, even though it's juxtapositioned with kind of finality and death. So even by kind of killing those characters off, you can explore their legacy, and kind of by writing them as such brilliant characters, then making the most empowering decision for them can kind of permeate through, and that's what people will be thinking about afterwards. And it's something that I like to talk about when I think of endings. It's things gained from characters during the journey of their play and how that comes to head at the end. So if we think of that as an elixir that someone finds, so your characters have to kind of go through a play, learning and developing, and at some point they will gather this kind of elixir, this thing that will change them. And it's something that helps bring an end to the text. It's something that they've gained throughout the work. It's a kind of decision or a moment that happens that kind of changes your character completely. So even when a character dies, the world has changed and they've made an impact, and they have kind of made their point and mark on the earth of your play. If you think about something there's a modern play called Baby Reindeer, which is a one-person play, and they talk about a stalker, and throughout the play they are talking about this stalker in a very negative way, as you'd assume. However, at some point during the play, the main character realizes that they kind of coexist with this person, and that person kind of gives them an impetus to be the person they are. And that's what makes it so interesting, is that there's a kind of realization on stage that this person has a different relationship with the person that they were vilifying and thinking very pejoratively, which kind of makes it really, it just kind of makes that twist or turn at the end really interesting and nuanced. And if you think of, there's a Debbie Tucker Green play, AFI, which is one of my favorites. Her kind of elixir is handed to the audience as she uses Jim Crow at the end of her play to land this kind of final thematic blow that kind of permeates throughout the work. It forces this kind of elixir onto the audience. So by elixir is basically things gained by your characters. And so I'd be thinking of things like knowledge, power, trust, realization. They don't have to be something massive. Like if you think of Sword in the Stone, that's the kind of physical embodiment of this elixir. It's someone pulling out the thing from the stone. But if you think about it more generally, it's a kind of revisiting of the way you think about things, or a character doing something that they hadn't done before within the framework of your play. So it's often knowledge or truth, a secret, something discovered about themselves. Often it's change. If you think of Beckett in Waiting for Godot, he kind of skewers that idea, and the two characters don't really learn anything at the end. They even try to kill themselves, which would end the play, and they fail to do that in kind of comical fashion. So it's kind of, in a way, it's this kind of laughing at the formatic structures that people do use. As I mentioned before, if you think about your ending and think about when you want to pull the camera away, or when you want to say the end of your play, it might be worth thinking, could I let this go on a little bit? And my example for that is a clip from The Graduate. And I always think that this ending is so brilliant because there's a point where you think a normal film would just end, and it doesn't, and the camera kind of stays on them. And I want to just kind of watch this, and you can tell me what does this elongation change from what it would have been if it ended just as they run out of the church, elated and happy.
He's too late.
And I think there's a point here where you could end it and then get on the bus and you would come away with a different message. But then if we watch further, it kind of makes it way more interesting, the ending that's been chosen.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.
Great. So what do we get from them leaving the... how do I publish? Stop share. What do we get now from them leaving it? Yeah, another film rewritten by The Simpsons. What do we get from that kind of, instead of them leaving triumphantly in, yeah, reality creeping in? Yeah, it's definitely an oh fuck moment, and whether they can real life implications right. And so just showing that, it kind of adds that depth. Yeah, adrenaline rush passes, exactly. So you can end on that high, but if you think that it might be more interesting to kind of show that little extra bit, it really gives a real moment where because you kind of celebrate with them and you're like, it's so dramatic and so over the top, and then at the end it's like, because the logistics of that would be like wild, but you don't think about that in the moment. You don't have to do that for everything you write. We don't always want the logistics when it comes to certain things like Disney, or you don't want to know kind of the ins and outs of things, but when it comes to something this kind of complex and really kind of well thought out, just having that kind of visual moment is really intriguing, and it's not telling us what to think either. So I always find that ending quite fascinating. So that's the thing we're talking about here, is after the curtain falls, and sometimes you want that, or other times you wouldn't. If you think about sequels, and often they're not as good as the first because often they've chosen to end it there. If you think about like The Lion King, I don't really want to know what happens next necessarily to Simba, just kind of ruling his land in a very peaceful, fair way. Happy Feet 2, apparently the worst sequel ever. And it's the same with a play that I watched recently, which I mentioned, about Beauty Queen of Lannan. It's quite dramatic at the end, and she kills her mother, and then at the end she just kind of goes into a kind of demented rocking state. And I wondered, would I want to know what happened after that? But then it might just be so overly tragic that it just wouldn't work as a play. So I always like to just kind of think about the kind of afterlife of characters and think of a reason why it's ended there. Often the ending is just the end of the phase of the thing that you're seeing. And there's a reason that the writer's chosen just to show that bit. It's kind of peaceful to know that, you know, things are going to end. When I'm in a really good play, I don't want it to go on forever. You're kind of glad that it's going to show us it at some point, because closure is quite cathartic. Even if it comes with another beginning or a death of a character, it's good to understand the mortality of plot and drama. And that's why sequels are always risky. There's a kind of regeneration of the urgency of a story, and that urgency is kind of lost when you're like, this story has to be told right now, and this story has to be told here. And then often it's replication rather than necessity. It feels like you've been tricked. It's like with something like Toy Story 4. You felt like it was done in 3, and then you feel a bit like hard done by, and and you think, do the characters need to continue on their journey or not? When you're going through writing your play or your film, you want to, the good thing about knowing your ending while you're writing is so you can lay things that I like to call breadcrumbs within your play, things that can kind of hint at the way the end's going to pan out. If you think of that kind of, it's kind of an overwrought expression now about Chekhov's gun, but that kind of sums that up about Chekhov's gun is seeing a gun in the first act, it'll go off in the third. That's kind of putting ideas subconsciously into your audience's mind. But I like to refer to it as breadcrumbs. Hello?
Hi, Pat. Sorry, I just had a question.
Of course.
Is this kind of similar to foreshadowing, or is it just that's more like a stylistic thing where you're showing a gun and therefore it's going to be used later? Or do you mean quite practically breadcrumbs are kind of like what they do in movies is called Easter eggs? Is that what you mean?
I think I mean the foreshadowing, what you're talking about kind of layering moments and ideas within that are going to make sense at the end.
Okay.
And I think if you drop too many breadcrumbs, they become litter and it becomes confusing. And if you think of things that were unsatisfying endings, often it's because what happens a lot in TV, because you've got so much time to kind of leave those things along the way. If you think of like Game of Thrones, or there was that Netflix thing, The Stranger, you're very good at like setting things up and leaving lots of things that you were like, oh, that's going to be resolved. I can't wait for that to be resolved. And you're thinking ahead, and then at the end, none of that happens. You feel a bit shortchanged. And I feel that can be something that you need to watch out for if you're leaving things for the audience to work out in your play. So don't drop litter in your play, is my advice. And if you do, you're going to have to pick it up in a draft, because you don't want the audience going home with a bag full of rubbish. That actually, that metaphor needs to be put in the bin. So there are so many plays that do this for good or for bad. I think you need to trust your instincts and kind of go with what your gut says for your story. You're the person that's writing this, and you were right. You're choosing the journey for your characters, who they are and what they're going to be. So that kind of leads us on to endings after endings, which is when you've kind of finished your first draft or the first thing you've written. You've kind of, what do people normally do after if you are writers, what do you do when you finish a first draft of something?
Put it away.
Put it away, throw it away.
No, just put it away and then just, you know what I mean, leave it a couple of weeks and then go back to it.
That's brilliant advice, and I think that's something that I would recommend for everyone, is to kind of put it in a drawer or some kind of folder, and leave it a while and give it time to breathe, because you'll be in such a rush to kind of do these things and heavily edit these kind of small bits. And a lot of times I find that I just kind of focus on the beginning of the play and start editing that, heavily editing that, and not really thinking about the kind of bigger picture. I find always writing out the kind of plot or through line in a kind of novelistic style with a few sentences always helps, just to kind of reframe the narrative and the plot in my head is really useful. I think thinking about plot rather than dialogue at the first stage after is way more important, because you can kind of tidy up dialogue along the way. And don't be afraid to leave it for, longer than you thought or expected. One thing that I do think helps after when you're ready to do a draft, and it helps with kind of character development and endings, is if you get your, say, 2 main characters or however many you have, and if you write their names down and then you write how they feel about the other character at the start of the play in 1 word or 2 words, and then how they feel about that character at the end of the play. And if they're the same and there hasn't been a kind of journey of that, it's probably the character needs more work. And it works with all the characters, within your play, and think about their relationships to each other character in the play, and think about how they change from A to B, because generally they should change. They could come back to the way they thought at the start, but often there's something in the middle that's either wavered up or down. I find that quite a useful thing for plotting my characters towards from the start to the end. We mentioned Harold Pinter before. He said that character is the greatest plot there is. So I think if you think of the character's journey and what they do from start to finish, that'll help you with your ending. Oh, and also Naomi, the first thing she does is eat a cupcake after they finish the draft. So I think we'll recommend that, definitely. And then I guess you've written something, and then you want to kind of put your work out there. I always would advise to people is to kind of find those people that you trust, a few people, and show it to them, but don't show it. I used to kind of just like fire it out and show it to as many people as possible, but I don't think that's useful at all. It's always good to have people that know you as a writer and read your work and will give you kind of honest notes. It's often quite useful to give it to someone who isn't into theatre or film, or just to kind of get their reaction. And then I always think about notes, and remember that you don't need to listen to everyone's notes. So just because you get notes back, you don't have to take everything as gospel and change it in your work, because it can be quite overwhelming. I find when someone's read a draft of your play and they've got all these kind of ideas, don't let other people change your play. I keep mentioning this, but it's so important that the worst kind of note you can get is, oh, if the character could do this at the end, this would be even better. Someone advised to have 3 people of different specialities that you trust. Yeah, that's it. If you can do that, that's good. But then I guess, because I've worked in a lot of theatres, it's interesting to kind of think about what to do when you've got your script. And I used to find when I just kind of started was just kind of sending it off everywhere I could. But what I do think is interesting, especially if you're writing a play, is to get in touch with theatres first, especially literary departments, and kind of speak to the literary manager and just introduce yourself and say who you are and what you're doing, rather than just send them a cold script. Because I've done a lot of reading for theatres, and I never think that actually sending your script in cold, even though they do have windows for that, is the best way to engage with buildings. I think the best way is to kind of make contacts and just introduce yourself, and look for places that have kind of new writing at the cut with them. So if you think of places like Theatre 503 in London or the Royal Exchange in Manchester, they're always good places to kind of reach out to and introduce yourself. Box of Tricks as well, definitely a place that you should engage with after this. If you've got something that you've been writing or thinking about writing, just drop them an email, say hello, say you're doing this course, and that's a kind of step on the way to forming a relationship with them. I think it's a lot less intimidating to do that than I used to just send out scripts to like 10 different theatres that I didn't really know anything about. And still, when I got obviously rejected, I took that as a kind of overplay shit, but really it's because they don't know who you are as a writer, or they don't know your writing style or your journey. So I always think that's really useful. And probably the best thing to do if you are sending things off blind is competitions, because the kind of bigger ones anyway that I've been involved with, they have a few people reading one script and they've got more resources for that. And even though it's almost like a lottery to win these things, it's not necessarily a meritocracy, but it can, often they have ways where they'll contact long list and contact short list. I know that the Bruntwood Prize, they engage with anyone that is on the long list. So it's kind of these things of making yourself known and aware to literary managers and people who work in theatres, and just to kind of say hello and ask about their process is way more important than just kind of firing that script off. Yeah, so making meaningful connections and just kind of looking after yourself and not being too stressed if you can't find the ending of that play. Often it'll just kind of come to you. and yeah, and just, you know, just feel your characters, know who they are, know their story, and know when it's time to pull that rug or throw that curtain down. And I think that's all. I think I'll leave it at that. It's been really interesting to just kind of engage and talk things through. Box of Tricks were a company that when I kind of just started out, they were such a good place to engage with, especially if you're from the north of England. And I did an attachment with them for a year, and it was one of the first times I got my work kind of performed and read out, and got really close dramaturgical advice. And I know that they'll speak to you and meet with you and just have kind of new conversations, as they're a kind of leader in new work in the north of England especially. So that would be my advice to you, is to finish that draft, use the ending that you know is right, don't let people change your work, and then engage with buildings that will look after you and will let your voice shine. But lovely to meet you, and if you've got any questions, ask. Okay, good question. Have I ever changed the ending completely after a first draft? Yeah, I think I have. Yeah, I think there's been times when I've really kind of dramatically thought about often you can kind of if you want to even reframe your play. So if you're writing something and you think, actually this story is more about the brother or more about the mother, then you can shift focus, and that would drastically change your ending. So there's been times when I've been writing something that I thought was about one character, and actually the kind of best friend or the supporting character was more interesting. So I've kind of almost started again, but used that first draft as a way to kind of frame that other world and bring that character in. So if something isn't working, but you're interested in that subject matter or that thing that is there, you don't need to bin or delete that first draft, but you can use it. And it's well better to have more stuff than less. Even if you think it's terrible, having way more to pick out from is really useful. So I would, if you do think, oh, this isn't working, I don't have an end, but I want to use this, you can kind of pick the bones of it and use it again.
I think is it the it was Kendall Fever. I think was it called The Great Almighty or something? But it was a play about a young woman with mental health problems, and then mum seemed to me to be in the back of it. And then at the end of the play, it seemed to be actually all about her mum, and it was really clever. The Almighty sometimes, yeah. Was
that played by, who was the mum? Julie?
Julie
Hesson. I can never pronounce it. That it was at the court, at the Royal Exchange.
It was,
and that was part of Bruntwood as well, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And I mean, it blew me away actually.
Mm.
The way that she wrote the ending, because it really surprised me how that changed the whole way I viewed the play then.
And it's interesting, something with like mental health is that kind of quick reframing, it's kind of like sums up that kind of mental health issue as well. And it's done in a kind of really subtle and interesting way. And you can do that, which is really interesting, is kind of, you think the focus is on one person, but the story is about the other person. And I suppose that end would be a kind of, or not a twist, but it's kind of a surprise. And it's more of like we were saying about the elixir coming to the audience, and Jenny was realizing that you were watching a play about the other character, not this character.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting way to do it. And yeah, if you can write like that, you're onto a winner.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you've written a feature script which could work in a theatre. So I would think about how it could translate to stage first. And then there's not really a format that you have to do in theatre, but I would think if you've got things like exterior one or anything like that, it would probably just need to tidy up to just a kind of normal theatre script format. People are a lot kinder than TV and film in the way that they will read a script, even if it's kind of in a different format. There's no strict format to write in a play. But I think as long as you haven't framed it as a film, if you've thought about why it would work for stage, then people will read it. And what I would do is I would look at any PDF versions you have of plays, or ask Box of Tricks if they could share anything with you. Failing that, I can share something and look at just how it's laid out. But remember that there's no strict and fast way of doing it with theatre. So whereas a lot of you need with TV and film, you've got to do it in a specific way. In theatre, you don't need to. But do think they will know if you've just written a film and then you're sending it to a theatre, as long as you've kind of thought about how it would work on a stage. That's perfectly fine.
Brilliant, thanks.
I've got a question. Well, it's not really a question, it's more of a thought, you know, because we've been living through this pandemic. I'm just wondering if we're going to see more kind of Hollywood, Disney type endings. Is that what people are going to want to go to the theatre and see, more uplifting stuff rather than, you know, the tragic endings?
I think it's hard to it's that kind of zeitgeist question. And I think there's probably, the answer is a kind of boring one, but there's probably always room for both kind of stories. I think you can tell a kind of tragic story that isn't like morose, and people will kind of get something out of it. But then I suppose you're right that sometimes people want escapism, but I guess you can have escapism and it doesn't have to be kind of Disney escapism. You think of like Pan's Labyrinth or something kind of detailed, nuanced one can also work. And also there's nothing wrong with fairy tales in Disney either. Yeah, that's true. And I was reading there was an interesting, there's a Guardian podcast that gives you like a section of the news, and they were talking about Squid Game and how that's been made because of the debt crisis in South Korea, and how this kind of seems like a little throwaway thing on Netflix. It really kind of frames the way especially young men are suffering with depression and suicide because of massive debts in South Korea. So even kind of things like that you think might be kind of throwaway, even in fun, often it can kind of reflect a moment in time. And I suppose that's like you talking about coming out of COVID and people wanting kind of positive escapism, and maybe that will reflect us coming out.
I watched the recent, I think it was Bristol Old Vic do Wuthering Heights recently. It was Emma Rice.
Emma Rice, was it?
It's
and
Emma
was
Rice,
Lucy
yeah.
McCormick.
Yeah, and they, you know, that's like, I think one of the greatest tragic stories. I don't know how it ends in the book, actually. I can't remember, but they made it end with a really lovely, like, love story about the future, you know, with the, which was.
Because sometimes that's who you want as well. You know,
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
of positivity doesn't go amiss, because there are positive things. So yeah, your ending doesn't have to be this kind of like
everyone dies.
Realism. Everyone dies. You, as a playwright, you could choose. That's
it was
kind
great.
of cathartic and fun about it.
It was great production, I thought.
Amazing. Everyone dies in the book. I love that. And then that's Emma Rice's ending. Fair play. But yeah.
Seems a good but slightly downbeat.
I like to end my
point.
That we should end this with everyone dies in the book. And
everyone dies in the book.
How I do that.
Brilliant. Well, if there's no more questions, then thank you so much, Patrick, for such a brilliant and informative session. I'm sure you've all got loads to think about coming away from that. And it's really lovely to meet all of you as well. You know, as Patrick says, do get in contact with us at Box of Tricks. We are a new writing theatre company. We do love to get to know new writers and get to know us and talk to us about your work. And I think actually doing that before you send us a script is always really helpful, actually, because it really helps put a lot of stuff in context when we're reading your work. So that ends this masterclass on endings with Patrick Hughes.